Hello, everybody. I'm Markos Moulitsas. I'm here with Kerry Eleveld. Welcome to this week's edition of our weekly show about politics, Daily Kos' The Brief. This is our first post-election show, so obviously we're going to be talking about that. And we're probably going to be talking even more about Georgia because this election, post-election, we're not done yet. So our guests today are maybe Dave Weigel from the Washington Post. He may be held up. We'll see about that. We're going to be talking to Carolyn Fiddler. She is an expert on state legislative races and just elections in general. She is also comms director at Daily Kos. So we'll play it by ear here, see if we can get Dave Weigel on. Otherwise, Kerry, it was a bit of a split decision, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair characterization. Obviously Democratic voters and Democrats in general didn't get this like overarching repudiation of Trump the way we wanted to, right? I mean, it's just like beyond our comprehension that someone watched 4 years of this guy and then said, yep, that's my guy. I want him back in the White House. I mean, it just, it's like, right, mind blown. Exactly. But that said, I think at the national level, that the disappointment with that initially sort of overshadowed some very, very incredible things that we did. And obviously one of the biggest is, the biggest by far is turning back. Yeah, getting Trump out, right? Turning back what otherwise was headed, no doubt, to become a fascist administration. And we defeated him not only as an incumbent president, which has only happened 3 times, I think, in the last 100 years or so, but also, he's got a whole state-run propaganda machine that people forget about. And it's really clear after this election that Donald Trump and Republicans have broken objective reality. And we managed to triumph over him despite that fact, right? Despite the fact that there's like 40 to 45% of, the public that just doesn't swim in reality, right? They just baseless, claims, this, that, and the other thing, slinging stuff against the wall. And they just eat it up. They eat it up. So they're either watching Fox News or they're going down a YouTube rabbit hole or whatever they're doing, but they're not grounded in the reality, the objective reality that the rest of the nation's grounded in. But I will say, so we did that, and that was no small feat because we brought the nation back from the brink effectively. And I say we Democrats, and anybody who voted for Biden, basically. Yeah. But, on top of that, of course, we had the historic elevation of Kamala Harris, which should not and cannot be overlooked. I mean, this is so amazing for so many people. First woman vice president, first woman of color. I don't know if anyone who's had kids, they've probably read the book, I think it's Black Bear, what do you see? And then you go through all these different animals that are looking back at you. And I saw this really endearing photo of, I think Kamala Harris's niece looking at her, and the back of the niece was like looking at Kamala Harris, and it said, brown girl, what do you see? And she said, I see a vice president looking back at me. And it was just sort of like, just choked me up just a little bit. I know. And I'm a crier, but I'm going to hold it together. So, but, it's that alone is amazing. But then just one, couple other things, right? We managed to claw back the blue wall. I don't think that blue wall is a forever wall. There's no way.
It's more of a pebble,
right?
Border.
It's a leaky pebble, right? A pile. Yeah. So, I think we're going to have one thing I think both you and I want to get into in the coming weeks is what's the future of the party look like and how do we plan for that future? But I don't think that future runs through the Rust Belt. which doesn't mean that we can't be competitive there, but we certainly can't be dependent on those states to come through for us, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania in particular. And then, of course, we got these probable flips in Georgia and Arizona. I think we're still up, in Arizona by 15,000.
Yeah, we're going to win it. It's not going to be by a lot, but we're going to win it.
Right. And we're going to win Georgia, except for all that fraud there, all that fraud in Georgia. No, I mean, there was no fraud, just to be clear, because the Republicans are basically the Republicans are saying their position is now the only three people who fraud happened for were senators, GOP senators, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, and then also for Trump. But all the down ballot races that they won, there was no fraud involved in those. So, Democrats.
We forgot the fraud in North Carolina. Like, who dropped the ball on that one?
Right, I know. We did a lot of fraud, but we gave the Senate majority back to the Republicans just to keep things fun and interesting.
So, Kerry, I have a theory about the hidden deplorables I want to get into a little bit. But before I do, if you're watching, drop a comment on Facebook and or on YouTube. Let us know where you are viewing from, where in the country you're viewing from. And also, if you want, you can let us know also what you've been doing to get Democrats elected this year. So please let us know where you're from and what you might have been doing to help Democrats get elected. So, Kerry, I have this theory about the hidden deplorables, right? It's the overarching point is that there is a group of people that will only turn out for Donald Trump.
Right.
And it's still, again, we can't make too many conclusive statements about 2020 because a lot of the data is still being crunched. So I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. But if you look at the polling, it was off in 2016. It was off in 2020. It was actually pretty good in 18 and 19 because we had some governor races in 19. Right. So it seems to me, it's a very nascent theory, that Donald Trump has a superpower. And keep in mind, Trump got out 10 million more votes than he did in 2016. And he lost votes because he lost those suburban white college-educated women. So he actually picked up even more than 10 million new voters. And again, your mind blows because you would think people actually saw what happened in the last 4 years and thought, you know what, this is finally going to get me off my ass and I'm going to go out and vote, right? That those people exist. But the theory is, the reason is that they like Trump. The reason that the pollsters can't pick him up is because I'm convinced that these are people that have completely lost faith in all institutions. They live in meth country. Stuff is crappy out there, right? They legitimately live in some pretty hellish places. They've been sold this whole idea that Black people in the cities are getting all sorts of free stuff from the government, right? And where's their free stuff? And so they don't vote because they don't think anything matters. Like, they had crap jobs, or they've lost their jobs because they got shipped off to China or Mexico. They don't trust the media because it's all biased and fake. And so you have Trump show up, and Trump basically is a destructor, right? I mean, he just destroys everything he touches: alliances, the CDC, institutions, norms. And so I think
nothing's sacred. Nothing.
Right. So I think he appeals to these people who are just so completely disenchanted with everything that has to do with society. Now, if you are the kind of person that wants to see everything go down, get destroyed, drives the big trucks, gives a middle finger to Prius drivers, tries to run off a Trump Biden campaign bus in Texas, are you going to answer a pollster? Are you going to pick up the phone and talk to some random person about who you vote for? No, you're going to give them the middle finger. Right? That's what you're going to do. So we literally cannot poll these people. They are impossible to reach. So this is a theory that they only turn out when Trump is at the top of the ballot, because they didn't turn out in 18 and Trump was begging them to. They didn't turn out in 2019 when Trump literally said, you need to make me look good by electing governors in Kentucky and Louisiana, right? And Democrats won in Kentucky and Louisiana.
And it appears that Trump's appearances there when he wasn't on the ballot was actually turned out to be a bigger negative for Republicans, right? Because they didn't get the benefit of drawing out his voters because he wasn't on the ballot. But he managed to say so many offensive things that, all the anti-Trumpers and the, suburbanites who had turned against Trump were driven to the polls. And so
in Kentucky and in Louisiana, red states, not even battlegrounds. So we're going to have an early test of this theory in January in these runoffs in Georgia. And we're not assuming they're not turning out. We're going to assume every single one of them turns out, because we have to make sure every single one of our votes goes to the polls, right?
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see if they actually turn out because between 2016 and 2020, about 350,000 more Republicans voted in Georgia between 16 and 20. 350,000. And yet we won because we turned out 500,000 more people in 4 years, right? Just to give you a sense of what Georgia Democrats and Stacey Abrams and all her volunteers, what they accomplished in Georgia, 500,000 more votes, but they still got 350,000 new votes. And the question is, will these people that turned out for Trump, will they turn out for Kerry Eleveld
and David Perdue, two extremely inspiring candidates, by the way. I mean, if you saw like David Perdue during that debate with John Ossoff, John Ossoff just wiped the floor with him, and David Perdue just sat there because he couldn't defend himself against the corruption that he's been involved with, and it's just anyway. It's talk about like just strict mediocrity. That's
it is. So, Kerry, since we're talking about Georgia, I think it's a good opportunity to bring our first guest on. She is Carolyn Fiddler. She's communications director at Daily Kos. She's also an expert on state politics. And first of all, Carolyn, welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
And tell us what you're seeing in Georgia. What's your gut sense about what's happening right now and what that might mean for January?
Oh gosh, all bets are kind of off in Georgia right now. This is undiscovered country down there in terms of a Democrat actually winning statewide, and almost getting there further down ballot. Georgia has obviously these rules about no one gets more than 50%. You go to a runoff, which is why we have more elections in January, and we don't know why. We don't know who controls the Senate yet. So that is not sort of a normal thing for most states, but this is the way it works in Georgia. And so things are a little unusual in terms of how, especially most other Americans think of their politics. So
there's an irony here. Yeah, there's an irony here that the reason this runoff system exists is to keep Black people from winning statewide. Literally, it's a Jim Crow law. And here we have a situation where Raphael Warnock, one of our two nominees heading into this runoff, is Black, may actually have been helped by this system that was designed to keep Blacks from winning statewide. So I'm actually enjoying that irony, and I'm really, really hoping it pays off.
Right. And what are the odds that the Republican legislature tries to, rushes to change that law if Democrats emerge victorious?
That's a really good question. I think they want to see if it plays out in more elections.
You think so?
I'm hoping this year is a fluke. Republicans certainly don't want to admit that Democrats might start winning in Georgia. They're not ready for that. They want to look at this as a one-off, and so they actually might not be in a rush to change that.
So, Carolyn, I'm going to categorize it as a rumor because I wasn't able to dig in, and maybe it's just a rumor, but there was sort of rumblings online that the Georgia Republican Party might try to eliminate mail ballots for the runoff election. Have you heard anything like that yet? And if not, is that even something that's possible this late in the game?
It's something that would involve a lot of court action for sure. It depends on how you characterize this election. Is it part of that same election? In which case, you can't ex post facto pass a new law governing the way this election is conducted. However, if it's characterized as a whole new election, then they could ram something through really quickly. But for all practical purposes, administration of elections takes time, and changing the way you administer elections takes time. So it's not completely off the table, I would say, but it's going to be a pretty long reach for them.
Let's just back up a second and frame this a little bit for viewers. If people haven't been paying close attention, of course, we now have these two Senate races in Georgia that could decide the who's going to be in the majority in the U.S. Senate, right? And what is happening there is sort of fascinating because Donald Trump is pissy, right? He's angry. He's got to, blame someone else for his losses. He's really mad. He's going to, purge a bunch of people from his administration, and he's pointing fingers about why he lost. And, Democrats stole the election from him. And he basically, according to reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, told in sort of no uncertain terms those GOP senators down there that they had to declare that the election was a fraud and that their own state elected officials who are Republicans had screwed it up, that it was quote unquote embarrassing, and that the Secretary of State, who's a Republican, should step down and resign because he handled it so badly. And so what you have is, basically, and then they did it. They said that Trump threatened them, and according to this reporting, and said, look, you guys got to come out and disown what your state election officials have done, or else I'm going to tweet bad things about you. And they can't afford to not have their, Trump's base turn out for them, right? Because Democrats might be able to sort of recreate what we did in November, but if Trump's base doesn't turn out, Republicans are going to fall really short of that. I think these are open questions that no one can really answer right now about turnout. But one thing they do need is those Trump voters. So they went ahead and trashed their own Secretary of State. And now you have Trump, who's basically taken the Republican Party hostage in Georgia. And you know what? He doesn't give a damn about whether or not those guys get elected. He just wants to make sure that November election is seen as illegitimate in his eyes. He needs it to be illegitimate in his eyes. He needs it to be illegitimate in the eyes of his voters so that they can stay upset. But it's just a fascinating thing, and I wonder, Carolyn, what you think. Do you have, or Markos, what you think about those dynamics and how they could play out in January? Because Trump is now going to keep torturing those folks. He's going to be at they're going to be at his behest, right? They're under his thumb. So I don't know. God only knows what he could do, but they don't get to. They spent now the GOP has spent the last 24 hours in a civil war situation down there in Georgia, without being able to concentrate on. We need to elect these people, right? We need to actually elevate them into office. Anyway, please, someone weigh in.
I think actually this also goes back to the question you asked, Markos, about whether or not Republicans can, slam through some last-minute legislation, making it harder to vote by mail or eliminating it entirely. Republicans in Georgia are in disarray. There's no sense of unity down there right now. So, maybe the leadership is strong enough to really pull people together, but, everyone's kind of dealing with the aftermath of this election in their own offices, so including the legislature.
Yeah, one thing that may be getting lost is that Republicans actually had a very contentious primary. It was a jungle primary, right? But it was between Kerry Eleveld and Doug Collins. And Doug Collins is right wing. He was the guy that Trump actually wanted to win. And Republicans tried to push him out of the race to just clear the field for Kerry Eleveld, and he refused. And Donald Trump, I think, was one of the reasons that he was able to refuse that effort. So you have this bad blood between those two Republicans. Well, Democrats are, for all intent and purposes, they're united around Raphael Warnock. There was this Matt Lieberman was, kind of a factor for a while, and he just faded in the end, right? People decided he was a piece of crap, and they were right. He is a piece of crap. So you have a more unified, and not only that, but given that the black vote was so instrumental in switching Georgia, the fact that we have a black candidate in that runoff, I think is going to be absolutely stellar. Not just any black candidate. Raphael Warnock is the head pastor of the church in Atlanta that Martin Luther King was part of. So he is a incredibly high profile, well-respected. He's just, I've had a political crush on the guy since the very, very beginning of this cycle. But between him and Ossoff, who went viral by just sort of rubbing David Perdue's nose on the floor at a debate, I think gives us a really potent 1-2 punch. And we have momentum. I feel that momentum. While Donald Trump is sitting there attacking his own party and screaming that why, the votes don't matter because Republicans or Democrats are just going to steal it anyway, I don't think it's a particularly motivating and unifying message to take into what is a basically everything is at stake election.
That's a good call. I do have a little bit of latent concern about the QAnon folks, the people who show up at these Trump rallies, just getting really angry and having it fester for a few months. But also we have the holidays intervening, and we're dealing with a huge COVID spike that's only going to get worse before it gets better. So there's just so much in play. I'm hoping that these hardcore folks will have a lot else going on.
Actually, it's interesting that you bring up COVID, and I'm gonna pivot a little bit, Carolyn, and I'm gonna sort of the conventional wisdom was that COVID would hurt Donald Trump, and it turns out in the end that the higher the prevalence of COVID in a county, the better Donald Trump did. What's that all about?
A lot to unpack there. A lot to unpack there. I guess that Republicans just don't believe in masks and social distancing.
Well, I mean, so let me offer something that's slightly more nuanced, and I'm going to just preface it by saying I can't be sure. I don't know what it's like to live in the body of a Trump voter. I mean, and I don't get it. Right?
You don't want it either.
And I don't want to get it, because I think for a lot of those voters, there's a whole lot of anger involved with that. And it would be an unfortunate place to live your life, right? In that headspace. But I will say, I do think there's the possibility. I mean, I do think there's the possibility that for some of these folks, they never quite connected the way a lot of sort of white collar workers have the privilege of doing, connected ending COVID or getting COVID under control with the economy, right? I mean, Trump made the economy separate from COVID control. He pushed this idea over and over again that you had to choose between the two. You either get to control COVID or you get to bring the economy back. You either reopen the economy, get the jobs back, or you shut everything down and you get COVID under control. And I think, what a lot of us who voted for Biden believe, either number one, they either believe at all costs we have to get, COVID under control, or they understood that you couldn't separate the two. And you had to, in order to get the economy back, you had to get COVID under control to some extent, because otherwise people can open, but no one's going to go if they think they're going to get infected by COVID, right? We can't just have the virus running rampant all over. And that's where we're headed at the moment based on, Donald Trump's stewardship of this thing. But I do think there's a universe in which some of these voters just really believed, hey, I can't afford to not go to my 9-to-5 job or my service industry job or whatever, because I don't have a paycheck. And guess what? Congress isn't coming through for me. So, I mean, because of Republicans, of course, because of the Republican Senate, they're not coming through for me. And so I can't afford to just, shut things down in order to have the, get COVID under control. So I do think that to some extent, some of those people voted like that. I mean, I'm not so sure that Trump made it an ultimatum for them. They couldn't do one. They couldn't have both. They had to have one or the other. And and I don't think this is the only thing that went into their thinking about who they voted for, but I think that is a possible, if you're looking at that issue specifically, right? I think that that's a possible explanation for something that seems, just like so mind-blowing to a lot of us Biden voters.
So just a reminder, you can leave a comment on our YouTube, I guess, our YouTube channel if you're watching the show, ask your questions, and we'll try to answer them on the air here. Now, I think you're right that there was a clear message from Donald Trump that it was one or the other. I mean, I think that's undisputed. In fact, I think that was their primary message heading into this election as a way to try to basically defang COVID as an issue. Now, we were helped by the fact that Trump also talked about how many TVs were on Air Force One, and yes, you could drink water with one hand, and all this sort of ridiculous Trump that went into every one of his rallies, and I think that helped us out. I also don't want to undersell Joe Biden's accomplishment. I mean, he won by a bigger percentage of any challenger since, I think we're going back to FDR, or we're going way back at this point, even bigger than Ronald Reagan in 1980. For a challenger, he's going to win the election by about 7 million votes when Hillary Clinton won the last one by about 3 million. This is on top of the record turnout massive turnout that Donald Trump himself had, right? So this is not a failure of a campaign by any stretch of the imagination. And by modern standards, it really is a pretty overwhelming, dominant victory, right? 306 to 222.
Right.
So I don't want to oversell that.
And he brought over the coalition that started in 2018 and really continued mostly in this year, right? In terms of more white collar sort of suburban voters going, particularly women, but overall going for Biden, as well as attracting some of those 2016 white male Trump voters back into the fold in 2020. So I mean, Biden was a candidate who did both things. He held the 2018 coalition, but also cut into some of Trump's margins with white men. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm actually going to go in a little bit different direction now, than I was going to go originally. And I'm actually going to ask Carolyn, do you think that any other Democratic candidate could have done this well? Was it inevitable for whoever the nominee was? Or did we need a boring old white guy on our ticket to be able to maximize the vote that we got this year? So could Kamala or could Liz Warren or Cory Booker or even Buttigieg, could any of them done as well as Joe Biden did? What do you think, Carolyn?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's hard to look at that question without considering the ticket as a whole, though. I don't think Biden would have done as well if he hadn't chosen Kamala as his running mate. So I think that is important. But also, I think there was a lot of comfort for a lot of people in having a boring old white guy at the top of the ticket. Like, Joe Biden doesn't tweet. You can tell his staff tweets for him sometimes, but there's no weird middle of the night all caps tweets about.
No, he'll congratulate somebody for Ukrainian Awareness Celebration Month. That's those are the tweets that Biden does.
Comfort with Biden, especially also as a known commodity. He's been in politics for a long time. He was vice president. I think that had a lot of cachet that I think a lot of Democratic primary voters didn't quite expect to have at the beginning of the cycle because, pre-COVID, the world felt like a different place. And then COVID set in and suddenly anything remotely unfamiliar felt extra scary because we were in just uncharted waters with regard to everything else. So that might be an element in his success. It's, again, hard to know, but.
I have a couple things to say about this. I mean, first of all, Biden wasn't my primary candidate. I was a Elizabeth Warren fan. And, I have to say, I looked at the results and wondered if she could have done it in the end. But also, it's important to remember that you build your strategy around your candidate. So, Biden was always going to be the Rust Belt candidate. They were always going to focus on Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. He was the guy who was going to appeal to that. So I won't prolong this because I think we have a very special guest that's about to come on. But who knows? Something exciting is about to happen. Don't leave. But I will say, I'm a little punchy. I'm still underslept here. I do think, but, Bernie Sanders, of course, he did really well with Latinos and he did well with, non-college educated white men loved Bernie Sanders. So he would have had a different coalition that he would have spoke to. And he would have put more emphasis, I think, into the Latinx vote and probably done, could have done, I don't know. I don't know if you turn off with the socialism thing, because that's the stuff that, Republicans would have thrown. I don't know if you turn off some suburbanites, but you probably do better with Latinx voters because Bernie Sanders put a lot of effort into, wooing them. And then you concentrate on different states like Georgia, Florida, Arizona, et cetera. Anyway, so it's really hard to answer, but I think Joe Biden and his team did an amazing job with the candidate they had, staying focused on their map and keeping the 2018 coalition for the most part and improving in the margins that they could, with the exception of the Latinx vote. So anyway, he won. That's all I got to say.
So, Carolyn, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. All right, so we have our next guest. He is Dave Weigel. He is a reporter covering elections and campaigns and just politics in general for the Washington Post. He's an old friend from when you were at Reason, right, David? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, several jobs ago. No, it's good to be here. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I was in the parking lot of this John Ossoff rally, which is a very Daily Kos thing to be at, and mix up the time. But I'm here now. Yeah. It's good to see you guys.
No, perfect. And actually, that's an incredible segue into what did you see at that, that John Ossoff rally?
Right. Well, it hasn't started yet. I don't know if you guys have been to any of these car rallies. But it's a fairly full parking lot at a church. He's going to speak, joined by a few other surrogates. And it's a fairly diverse crowd of Georgians. I started to talk to some people. That's why I lost track of time, because I was in some conversation with voters. And lots of awareness. I mean, they all are very happy about how the election went, very angry about Republicans denying what happened. And so I guess not surprising, but interesting how energized people are after, a fun Saturday and then a fairly demoralizing couple of days.
When you talk about people are energized, are you specifically talking about Democrats? Have you had a chance to talk to Republicans yet, particularly since the civil war seems to be brewing and then Donald Trump's just creating chaos at the top? Have you gotten a sense how Georgia Republicans are currently viewing this race?
That's literally what I'm doing tomorrow. Marco Rubio is in town campaigning with both of the Republicans who made the runoff here. And you're right. The Republican argument has been not so much we need the Senate to do things, but we need the Senate. We need the Senate. I mean, the messaging from these two Republican candidates has not been about anything they would do in power. It's just about how the election's not over yet. And there's quote unquote irregularities nobody can prove or they can even cite that should overturn the results. So I'm curious. I mean, I'm going to be with them in, less than 24 hours. And that's what I'm focused on tomorrow, is what they're arguing. Not that I expect to be convinced by it. Yeah.
Dave, I've just got one question. Who's going to win in January?
I don't know yet, but I'm curious because Republicans are arguing. So they're clearly trying to deny the election results as long as possible, file lawsuits. That's going to be done mid-December. So then they'll have the holidays and not much time beyond that. And I don't know what the message is going to be, or how they turn voters out. So they're good at turning voters out. But the thing that, and you guys have probably talked about this, the thing that blew up everybody's turnout expectations is just Donald Trump pulling out all these Republicans who don't normally vote. Joe Biden pulled out more Democrats who don't normally show up. I mean, not just Democrats, pulled out voters who then pulled a lever for him. And it's an X factor. I mean, the old wisdom in Georgia is that turnout falls by half in a runoff, and Republicans always win it. Democrats have not had a head of steam heading into a runoff since 1992. And to be fair, they lost that one. But you have, I don't know the mood of the Republican Party. I know they're going to spend a lot of money. They're basically treating this like a national election. And I don't know what Democrats are doing yet, to the degree to which they're going to show up, send resources, send surrogates. But I don't know yet. I think Republicans have clear advantages, but I don't know what it would look like if in a race where clearly the problem is they're losing all these suburban voters, if their message is we are Donald Trump's party and we're never going to admit that he lost.
I have this sort of theory to your point that you say we probably talked about it, and we have. And I have this theory about I'm calling it the hidden deplorables, right? These are people that are so sort of cut off from society, right? They live in meth country. They don't believe in any institutions. They don't think anything can help them, and that they rally around Donald Trump because he is so destructive, not because of any policy. It's a cultural affinity that they just want to burn it all down, and they see Trump doing that. So I guess one of the big January in Georgia is going to be a big test case for whether this theory actually exists and whether these people will turn out for Donald Trump when he is not on the ballot, because the polling was okay in 2018 and it was okay in 2019. Only when Donald Trump is on the ballot do things blow up. You have spent a lot of time on the road. It's one of the great things about your reporting is you're actually on the ground talking to people, even during a pandemic. It's actually really, really cool. Do you get a sense that these people might actually exist? And if so, what is it like talking to them?
You did, and so it's tough. So you'll ask everybody if they voted, and it's a tough question. Pollsters will tell you because sometimes people don't want to admit that they didn't vote. Sometimes they literally forget they didn't vote before. But you would meet people who either never voted before and then voted in 2016, or were gonna vote this time and hadn't voted in 16, or you'd meet people who said, my cousins never voted and they love Trump and they're going to vote this time. And I think I feel pretty good about my reporting before the election, but I do think I might have not paid enough attention to those voters. We wrote about them. I mean, it was part of the conversation, but it was unprovable. I mean, the whole discussion of whether we can trust polls or we should assume shy voters, I don't know if a good solution is just look at polls and add 6 points for Republicans, because that honestly didn't work in this election. In Georgia, this is a state where Biden's up by 0.2, 0.3%. He was trailing in most of the final polls. The landmark poll here, which is the standard every state, most states have a standard poll. Saw a 4-point race. I think Trafalgar saw a 4-point race in Trump's favor. So they actually didn't. They had a model that assumed fewer Democrats showing up, which is not a rarity, but that's not what was happening in this election. Sorry, I'm not used to. I don't know how all these guys do car videos where they're lecturing for 20 minutes about sovereign citizenry, and I'm just trying to hold my phone up. Right. So to answer your question, yeah, they totally exist, and this is the thing I'm asking about the bet Republicans are making. If they've learned, I think, and this is in course of how American politics beyond the parties is moving, they've totally ditched the old Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney style of politics. The Republicans no longer think they can get a majority by running on tax cuts, entitlement reform, deficits. I mean, are they going to try to cut spending with Biden in office? Totally. But they learned this election that just being the party that spends lots of money and sends out checks is way more fun and gets you more votes. So I think that this special is going to be a test. If instead of running on quote-unquote conservatism, they're running on just Trumpism. And this is what Kelly Loeffler's ads were a lot more memorable than David Perdue's. She was comparing herself to Attila the Hun, but specifically just emphasizing that she wanted unregulated firearms and that she hated the media, but nothing else. I mean, there's no fiscal conservatism, none of the stuff that Georgia Republicans usually win on. So they're trying something that, and what's weird about Georgia, this is a state where Trump in 2016 and losing this year did way worse than any Republican since the 90s, right? There are states where he did better. This is a state where he markedly did a lot worse, and that coalition is not as strong as it is in other parts of the South. So the fact that they're going to kind of gamble the election on being as Trumpy as possible is super interesting, and I think it is a bet on there's that voter who never votes. Let's tell him this is about Trump's honor, and he'll turn out. That's hell of a gamble.
Dave, do you think, you were just talking about those ads from Kelly Loeffler, do you think that they were successful? I mean, has she successfully painted herself in the mold of a Donald Trump? Because she's otherwise kind of a really sort of like moderate. She was appointed as a kind of moderate, don't tick anybody off, don't rock the boat.
Suburban white women.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Right, appeal to white women, and she should get the suburbanites. And like David Perdue, I said earlier, he's just such a mediocre guy. I mean, he's not Trumpy. And I just wonder, I wonder if they can successfully, since they're running on Trumpism because they don't have anything else at the moment, can they successfully sell these two candidates as Trumpy, especially when Trump isn't on the ballot?
That's a good question. And so Loeffler's campaign so far has been less about introducing herself in a new way. It's been about attacking Raphael Warnock, who I think I'm catching up with later, the other candidate in the race. And there's an oppo dump that was waiting for months. of just things he said critical of Israel's policy in the West Bank. And so they're using that to say that he's an anti-Semite, he's Jeremiah Wright. Again, nothing defending her. So you're right, she was introduced as maybe the solution to win these people who've been leaving the Republican Party in Georgia, and utterly rebooted. She did, as far as I can tell, pretty terrible with the sort of voters that she was trying to win. She won because she ran as the more conservative candidate. And in a race where Doug Collins, who's now the Trump's point man on trying to get the election results thrown out, was literally closed out the campaign on a Trump Defenders tour with Roger Stone and Carter Page and people who I don't remember from the Trump impeachment. So she ran as, they both were running as Trumpy as possible. And is he super unpopular? He's like, probably 46, 47% approval. But they've not tried to do anything but be Trump allies. You're right. And I think there's a version of Kelly Loeffler that is easier to sell in places like Cobb County, where Biden's kind of blown away every Republican, every Democratic vote ever. She did terribly there, and I don't know how they reintroduce her. I think it's going to be more, let's make the Democrat unacceptable.
Yeah, it's funny that you reminded us of the Attila the Hun ad, because it sort of feeds into my notion that they just want to destroy things, right? Because Attila the Hun didn't build the civilization. Yeah. He literally destroyed and pillaged and raped his way through Asia. So it actually fits that theory perfectly, and that it would be a winning look for her amongst those people, for sure. Just thinking about that. There are 2 months, right?
There's a rally outside. Let me do one thing so I can close this. 2 months. There's from 1 second. Closing the door. Yeah, 2 months. 2 months. It's a January 5th election. So.
And there's going to be more money than got thrown.
I figured it out.
Look at this.
Go ahead. More money.
We got money on the trail. He's like literally going to show us. He's literally going to show us, parking lot rally. I mean, this is great. When you first came on, Weigel, I thought you were driving.
I can show you. It's that's what I'm looking at. Those are speakers who are going to be talking soon. I need to find Ossoff at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, anyway, that's great. Is all that money, we saw the money that was thrown on ads. I don't get the sense that they really moved the needle much of anywhere. So you're on the ground, you're talking to people. Do people talk about the TV ads that they see? Is that the money that best sort of defines races? Or are there other things that you've seen that better move numbers for either the Republicans or the Democrats?
Well, with Republicans, the most activated Republicans, it's less what's on TV, it's more what's on Fox News. And there's overlap, right? A lot of the ads, we're emphasizing that. There are a couple candidates who are already finished, because we only got 2 runoffs, where I did meet people and something stuck from a negative ad or a positive ad. This was the case in Iowa, where people were pretty aware of Teresa Greenfield's business record, which is the entire Republican attack for a year. But nothing's really broken through in the same way. I need to talk to more Republicans here to see if they love Kelly Loeffler for comparing herself to Attila the Hun. But I don't see that. The Republican strategy was not run the most ads. They did that desperately. The Senate Leadership Fund had this cash infusion from Sheldon Adelson and others at the last minute to run more ads. But their strategy was always, we're going to take, a couple of weeks off the pandemic, and then we're going to go hard at the doors and never stop and walk through neighborhoods we never campaign. That was their strategy, and so that was more important. So, and I didn't do as much of this. I had a colleague, Robert Samuels, who had a really revealing story where he went to rural North Carolina with these black voices for Trump volunteers, and they're just kind of giving a version of Donald Trump to voters at the doors that's not necessarily the real Donald Trump. That was more the message: is, hey, we're your neighbor, we're in front of you. Donald Trump is gonna fix healthcare. Donald Trump is gonna bring racial justice, things like that. And in ads, if you ran that as an ad, people would say that's not right. They were more focused on in-person persuasion, and that's kind of a question I have about Democrats now. They got 2 months. Are they going to do more of that or not?
Yeah, I think that's an open question, right? I think there is some evidence that maybe that, as well as as well as Democrats did with phone banking and text banking and whatever, like I don't think you can be quite as effective without being at the door. And yet they're, our entire operation is built on being responsible around the pandemic, which is going to be absolutely surging. And I wonder, if you took we can't do this, but if you took COVID off the table, Dave, do you think that Democrats get out the vote operation there right now, as built through Stacey Abrams' very hard work on the ground, is on par with where Republicans are?
Well, Georgia is an interesting case because I think the party is actually very strong here, strong at that level. And people I was talking to at this rally had gone canvassing in the final couple weeks. Before that, they had been making text. So I honestly think there's Democrats here who would go out and knock on doors. They lost, a couple months of doing the same thing Republicans are doing. But this is a place where they definitely have the bodies to go out and do that. Republicans have a little more experience recently. But that's not, and I don't think this election, there's going to be money flowing in, but I think the ads are going to be a smaller part than whether people go back to their voters. And, with any runoff, if you turn out 60% of people who voted in the presidential election, you're on track to win it. I think it's going to be more about that, more about finding people and dragging them back out, and which is going to be pretty highly motivated. The last few Georgia runoffs, it was, okay, well, Democrats were down a couple points. Maybe we can win this. What's the big deal? I remember in 2008 with Jim Martin, it was, well, if we win this, we can get 60 seats in the Senate, and Republicans are motivated to stop that. I'm not sure how it's going to work this time again, because it's I don't think that Republicans are going to be demotivated, but I'm not sure how they're going to tell them for a month Trump could still win this election, then he's not going to win it. Then they're going to tell him for 3 weeks that we need to stop the Democrat takeover of the Senate. I don't think that'll be ineffective, but I can see Democrats catching up. But you're right. If COVID is surging across America during this runoff, that's a question Democrats are going to have. Do we take the approach where we're the safe party that's not knocking on doors right now because we're trying to keep people healthy, or do we join the field with Republicans because it wasn't the thing that Democrats were saying all year that they're going to get punished by voters if they knocked on doors. I don't think that was true. They succeeded in turning their people out, but they didn't do enough persuasion in a lot of places, right? They didn't find people who were getting negative mailers and getting the other side at their door, telling them the candidate was terrible. They didn't go and confront that. So I think Republicans I bet on them to have the numbers at first, but if Democrats activated the people who we're here in 18 and 20, they absolutely can find out all the voters they need.
Do you get any sense that the defund the police, was that particularly motivating to Republicans? This is now a battle internally within the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
My sense and feeling is that, it probably did turn off some people, but it also activated youth vote in record numbers. So maybe it was a wash, or maybe it just sort of realigned where the votes were coming from, more votes from the cities where young people live. Do you get any sense of how that played out while you were out doing your reporting in places like Iowa?
Yeah, it was more of a harm than a help, just because where did Democrats need to hold and build? It was not just the suburbs where they're doing fine, and the evidence, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia suburbs where there was a night of unrest, although not deadly, but a night of unrest a week before the election. They did better in the suburbs than they ever had. So it wasn't clear in the inner suburbs that mattered. I do think it was harmful for Democrats if they weren't very well known with voters outside of that, with the rural white voters who, and this is common in a lot of political science, right? The further you are from a group of people, the more doubt you have about them. You find even conservative Republicans in Texas have different attitudes about immigration than conservative Republicans in North Dakota and Iowa, right? So I think there was some of that. People who were furthest from the cities were the ones most worried about the cities catching on fire. Look at Oregon. Oregon, I think Biden did, I think he's up by 17 points. He added 69,000 votes in Multnomah County. In places that are close to the cities, no one thought, with the exception of Staten Island, where there's a lot of cops, no one said, "Oh my gosh, the TV is right that they're going to get rid of police and my house is going to burn down. I think that was more effective in the reach places that Barack Obama had done pretty well, and that turned some people off. And again, if there were Democrats knocking on doors saying, "Here's what we actually believe," I think that would have been countermanded. I think that I talked to Connor Lamb, who's done a couple of interviews about this, and that was his take. Is he thinks he survived that because his campaign had never stopped. Special election 2018, 20, it never stopped organizing. People knew him. It wasn't credible to say that he would do it. But some of these Democrats who didn't get super well known, I think it was harmful. And the ones like your Senate candidates like Greenfield, who were just introducing themselves, I don't think it helped them. And at the same time, it definitely did turn out more young people. I mean, Joe Biden was not, and this is the thing with Republicans are kind of grabbing everything to say this election might have been stolen. Joe Biden was not the kind of guy who's on his own inspired huge youth turnout. It took that extra issue.
So, Dave, we have time for one more question. Carrie, do you have something you want to ask, or should I close this out?
No, I love everything we've gotten from Dave. I feel good, but if you have another one, go ahead.
So, yeah, really quickly, on Election Day, you were promising on your Twitter that you would be able to pivot to tweeting about your other hobbies, like classic rock. Is that ever going to happen? Are you ever going to be able to do that?
I think so. I mean, so I got this runoff. I'm not going to be here for 8 weeks, but I'll be here for part of it. And I'm interested. I mean, it's kind of tough. How do you cover the Republican vote lawsuits? Because the point of a lot of the claims is to get the media printing the claims, and then hopefully the media not printing them when they fall apart, right? So I think I'm going to be focused on that, but I can already feel the maybe in a month that this is maybe less than that. I mean, Pennsylvania's going to start certifying votes in a week. I think by Thanksgiving I'll be tweeting about Gas Fusion and Pink Floyd and King Crimson again.
That's great. David, thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, that was great. I want more people out in the field. I thought he was driving, and I was like, oh God. And then I realized, he's stationary. He's in a parking lot. Took a lot of pressure off. So
we have an audience question, Carrie. Question: I worry about dismissing the lawsuits and I don't think this is from Craig on YouTube. I don't think he means dismissing them legally. I think he means dismissing us as we're kind of blowing it off and not taking them seriously.
Yeah.
I worry about dismissing the lawsuits. An annoying number of GOP leaders say election results might change. Is there anything we can do other than spreading the faith with conservative neighbors? And that's from Craig on YouTube. What do you think, Carrie?
Well, first of all, I mean, I wrote about this today. Look, I think it's a danger because what the Republicans...
What's a danger? What's a danger?
It's a danger to ignore them entirely, right? Yeah. Just assume that the institution, that the judicial branch is going to do its job, and then what it decides, which is it's been turning. I don't even know. For a while, it was like Trump's lawsuits. They were like 0 and 8 or something like that. I can't remember, but like it's worse than that.
0 and everything.
They haven't won a single lawsuit, and all of them have been turned back for lack of evidence, basically. So legally is not the concern, right? The concern is sort of like the disinformation and the vitriol that Republicans are injecting into the public, right? Into the public sphere.
Dave made a really, really good point, actually, that the point of these lawsuits is to get the coverage when they're filed, but no coverage when they get dismissed.
Right.
And I've been hanging out in conservative outposts the last couple of days, just seeing what they're talking about, how they're organizing. And there's a lot of this lawsuit and that lawsuit that's going to get us Pennsylvania. And first of all, we're talking lawsuits that are like about 200 votes. I mean, this is not even incredibly, even if they were successful, it wouldn't flip the elections. But these people think, one, that they would. There's a lawsuit in Pennsylvania, and they think it means Pennsylvania, not 200 sequestered ballots that were already sequestered. And two, they're talking about lawsuits that have already been dismissed, and they don't realize it. So he's right. This is exactly what they're doing, and it's working.
Well, so I think that Democrats are sort of letting this go unchecked too much. And I watched some of Biden's press conference today, and he's not the guy. He's not the guy to go after this because he's promoting whether or not we agree with this or think this will happen, he's promoting this sort of olive branch, brand of, I'm going to try and work with Republicans and whatever. That remains to be seen. But what he needs is Democrats, in Congress to be doing sort of the blocking and tackling for him, right? He needs them, I think, at this point, because what happened yesterday was the Republican Party congressional Republicans decided they were going to coalesce around this ludicrous effort that's legally headed nowhere by Trump. And, the Senate Republicans are going with it for the very reason that we talked about earlier in the show. They need his voters to show up, which I still think is a tough sell.
In Georgia.
Right, in Georgia, sorry, for those Senate races, right? They desperately need those voters to show up, and they can't afford to alienate them. But at the same time, they are, so yesterday what became clear, you had Attorney General Barr come out and say, well, I've authorized my federal prosecutors to, investigate substantial allegations of fraud, but there are none yet. So it's really just a bunch of hokey poke, it's just,
it's headlines. Justice Department is going to investigate fraud.
Right. It's garbage. Right. And then you have, Mitch McConnell going on the Senate floor and going to, bat for Donald Trump, saying he's got 100% right to investigate these claims, and also, throwing out a bunch of revisionist history about how Democrats never conceded to Trump when he won, so why should we concede now, and things like that. So, they are injecting a bunch of vitriol into the public sphere, and I really think Democrats now, congressional Democrats, Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats in particular, need to start holding press conferences daily, answering all questions, because we have nothing to hide, nothing. So, hold a press conference, be unified in the fact that this is all garbage, and, remind people how many they're losing, come up with a couple memorable phrases about, how many they're losing, right? Yeah. And then answer every question that—
Hammer it. 0422, 0423.
Right, exactly. And answer every question that reporters have, because we cannot allow this to be going, getting in the public sphere unchecked by Democrats. And Joe Biden isn't the one to handle that, right? We need congressional Republicans to be doing it. We just had a little guest appearance from one of your children.
Oh, yeah. So
scoop by and then scoop back the other way. Anyway, it was fun.
So yeah, Craig on YouTube was also talking about how he wanted to know if there's anything he can do, and I think one of the things just people in general can do is when you're sort of right wing uncle on Facebook is saying things that aren't true. It's just to challenge them and just be in people's face about the truth. And I know it's uncomfortable and I know it's rough and it sometimes seems like it's a losing cause, but there are people watching and reading that aren't talking, and you're also sort of educating them. So even if your right-wing uncle wants to say, Trump won Georgia, then you respond saying, no, he didn't, and these lawsuits aren't going anywhere. And then everybody else who's watching that thread also gets educated. So we need to be more forceful, more in their face where they communicate. And particularly for any individual, it's those direct contacts. It's the people it's your social circle. I mean, we can't control what Democrats do. We can just kind of beg them to do the right thing. But you can't control speaking up when you're around people that are misinforming other people. So, Kerry, that's our show today.
Wait, can I just say, I think we got a good shot at these Senate races. It's, yes. I mean, by history's sake, Republicans have the advantage because historically in that state, they've done well, and they've done well in these off-year elections and things like that. But they've got to convince Trump's voters to get out for these elections. And guess what? Trump's voters don't care about the Senate. The vast, these people that he pulled out of the woodwork that don't normally show up for an election, they're trying to burn down the institutions. The Senate is an institution that they don't care about at all. And I think it's hard for them, especially when they're going to tell everybody we got these lawsuits, and then their lawsuits are going to fall flat and whatever, that they're going to get these people back to the polls. So, I mean, I think Democrats have a shot here.
But even if they turn out, remember, Joe Biden won Georgia. We are the winners in Georgia. So whether they turn out or not, doesn't matter. We can win those. So make sure you, if you can, donate to John Ossoff, donate to Raphael Warnock, donate to Stacey Abrams' organization, whose name is escaping me right now. We can put it in the show notes.
Also,
and thank you.
You can register to vote. If you live in Georgia and you didn't vote in November but want to vote in January, you can still register to vote. So go on the Secretary of State's website and figure that out.
So I'm sure everybody watching the show probably has, but you may know people who haven't. So make sure you get that social circle. Once again, you are the biggest influencer to people around you in your life. Thank you so much. This is Daily Kos, The Brief. We air every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. Please subscribe to the Daily Kos channel on YouTube. You can join us at dailykos.com proper. Thank you so much. See you guys next week.